Welcome to Cryptic Lore. Tonight, we descend into the shadowed heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a place where the silence feels alive, and the mountains keep secrets older than the people who live there. These stories come from real encounters, told by those who still can't explain what they saw. For privacy and safety, some names and locations have been changed, but the fear you're about to feel is completely real. Before we begin, I ask only one thing. If you feel that chill down your spine, if curiosity pulls you deeper into the dark, subscribe. Your support keeps me going and keeps these real horrors from being forgotten. Now, take a breath, dim the lights, and step with me into our first unsettling tale from the Appalachian wild. In the spring of 2011, a man named Eli Warren made a choice that would change the way he understood the line between the living and the dead. He was 28 then, trapped in a mind-numbing office job in Ravenwood, Virginia, where the fluorescent lights seemed to drain the color from his life. Every day felt the same. Spreadsheets, meetings, polite laughter that never reached the eyes. The only thing that ever brought him peace was the wild. The woods had always felt like home, the silence of the forest, the ache of the trail beneath his boots. So when his vacation finally came around, he knew exactly what he needed. 2 full weeks alone on a remote stretch of the Blue Ridge Trail, far from the noise, far from the endless buzz of screens and voices. He told his family his plans, left his itinerary with his brother, packed his gear, and drove 4 hours into the mountains. Nothing but a backpack, a tent, and the kind of hunger that only solitude could feed. The first 3 days passed quietly. Eli found his rhythm again, the burn in his legs, the steady swing of his pack, the old familiar pain that felt almost comforting. He rose with the sun, hiked through forests thick with oak and hickory, and crossed streams that shimmered like glass. Moss-covered boulders rested like sleeping giants beside the trail, untouched for ages. The mountains felt timeless, older than memory, older than man, and walking through them made Eli feel small in a good way, like his worries didn't matter against the slow heartbeat of the earth. He ate when he was tired, trail mix and jerky under the trees, and kept walking until the light began to fade. At night, he'd pitch his tent near water, cook a simple meal over his camp stove, and read by the beam of his headlamp until sleep took him. On the 4th night, he came across a small clearing with an old stone fire ring, clearly used by other hikers before. A fallen log sat perfectly beside it, like a bench waiting for him. The air was cool, and for the first time, he decided to build a fire. He'd been avoiding it to leave no trace, but tonight the warmth called to him. He gathered dry wood, arranged it carefully, and coaxed the flame to life with his lighter. Soon, the fire was alive, crackling, breathing, throwing golden light against the trees. Eli sat on the log with his back to the forest, staring into the flames. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt completely at ease. The office, the deadlines, the shallow conversations, it all felt far away, like another life. He leaned closer to the fire, watching it shift and spark, until a strange smell crept into the air. At first it was faint, almost nothing, but it grew stronger, sharp, acrid, and wrong. The smell of burned flesh, the kind of smell that hits somewhere deep in the brain, primal and nauseating. Eli frowned, checked his boots, wondering if he'd stepped in something dead earlier. But the smell wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the dark woods behind him. He turned slowly, every hair on his arms standing up. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure. At first, Eli thought it was another hiker, a man, tall and broad, standing completely still about 20 feet away. But the longer he looked, the more wrong it seemed. The man wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was just there. Eli opened his mouth to call out, to ask if he was lost. But then the fire shifted, and he saw. The man was burned, not sunburned or scarred, burned in a way no living person could survive. His skin was blackened and cracked, curling away from raw, weeping muscle. His scalp gleamed where his hair had been seared away. His hands were stiff, the fingers fused together where the flesh had melted. And his face, God, his face was a ruin. Bone gleamed through the charred skin, lips gone, teeth locked in a permanent grin. His eyes were milky white, empty, but fixed on Eli. Eli couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed run, but his body refused. They stared at each other across the firelight, one living, one not. The smell was suffocating now, thick and oily in the air. And then, without a sound, the burned man turned. He didn't limp. He didn't stumble. He simply walked, slow, steady, back into the trees until the darkness swallowed him whole. Eli didn't sleep that night. He fed the fire until dawn, keeping it alive out of sheer terror. Every snap of a twig sent his heart racing. He never saw the burned man again, but the feeling of being watched never left him. When morning came pale and cold, he packed his gear with shaking hands and started back the way he came. He didn't care about finishing the route. He didn't care about the trip. He just wanted out, back to his car, back to somewhere safe, somewhere the dead stayed dead. After a couple of hours on the trail, he noticed something new. A narrow dirt road leading to what looked like a cabin, or what was left of one. About 50 yards from the path stood a blackened skeleton of wood and ash, smoke still curling faintly from its remains. A sheriff's car sat in the driveway, yellow tape flapping in the wind. Eli slowed, uneasy, as a deputy stepped out of the car to meet him. The man looked exhausted, uniform wrinkled, coffee stain on his chest. He asked if Eli had seen anything strange, anyone suspicious. Eli hesitated, then asked what had happened. The deputy's expression darkened. "Family used to live here," he said quietly. "Man, wife, 2 kids, house caught fire 4 nights ago. Whole place went up fast. Old wood, dry as tinder. By the time help came, it was too late." Eli felt his stomach drop. 4 nights ago, that was the night he'd started his hike. The same night he'd camped just a few miles south of here. And last night, the man in the clearing, the burned man. He mumbled something about being sorry and left before the deputy could ask more questions. He didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. Who would believe him? He wasn't even sure he believed it himself. But as he hiked away, the image of that face burned in his mind. The melted hands, the sightless eyes, the way he had simply turned and walked into the dark. Eli wondered if the man had been looking for something that night, or someone. Maybe he'd died trying to save his family, and now his soul wandered these woods, still searching for them, not understanding that they were gone. Eli didn't stop until he reached his car. He threw his gear in the trunk, started the engine, and drove without looking back. He never returned to that trail. Never spoke of it again, except once, to his brother. And even then, he left out the details. But sometimes, late at night, when sleep won't come, Eli still smells that stench of burnt flesh in the back of his throat. He still sees the figure standing at the edge of the firelight, those dead eyes staring through the dark. And he can't help but wonder if that burned man is still out there, wandering the mountains, searching for something he'll never find. The Blue Ridge Trail stretches over 2,000 miles through some of the oldest wilderness in the eastern United States. People vanish there every year. Some are found, most aren't, and maybe, just maybe, not all of them ever really leave. I never imagined I'd be the one telling this story, but after what happened to my hiking partner, Evelyn Hart, during the summer of 2013, I can't stay silent any longer. Some might call me crazy or say that grief has distorted my memory, but I know exactly what I witnessed in those northern wilderness woods. I know what took Evelyn from me, and it wasn't the exposure or starvation the authorities claim. Evelyn and I had been hiking together for over 3 years when we decided to tackle the Crestwood Trail. She was 66, a retired nurse from Vermont, and easily one of the strongest people I had ever met. We began our journey in Georgia back in March, and by July, we had reached Western Hollow. The plan was simple. Hike from Maple Ridge Shelter to Pineview Shelter, then meet her husband, Derek, at Route 42 the following day. Everything changed on July 22nd. That morning remains burned into my memory. It still haunts me. We had breakfast together at the shelter, sharing instant oatmeal and coffee while plotting our route. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze drifted through the trees. Evelyn seemed thrilled, expressing pride at how far we'd come. She even laughed about how her grandchildren would never believe their grandmother had trekked over 2,000 miles. About 4 hours into our hike, we stopped near Raven Creek for a water break. The trail was well marked there, with white blazes visible every few yards. Evelyn said she needed to step off into the woods for a bathroom break, something we'd done countless times over the past months. She hoisted her backpack and disappeared into the dense forest roughly 200 feet from the trail, just as the guides recommended. I stayed by the stream, listening to the water trickle over the rocks. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I called her name, but the only response was the whisper of the wind through the trees. 20 minutes in, I began to worry. Evelyn was always punctual and cautious, never straying far from the trail. I followed the direction she had gone, calling louder and louder. The forest was thick with hemlock and pine, the canopy so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. After 10 minutes of searching, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't Evelyn answering. It was something else entirely. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Low whistles followed by sharp, clicking noises. Not the type of clicking I'd ever heard from a woodpecker or any other bird. These noises were deliberate, almost like a language or code. They seemed to echo from multiple directions, as though whoever, or whatever, was making them was communicating with others. I pushed through the underbrush, following what I believed might be Evelyn's path. The clicking grew louder, more rapid. Then I heard something that froze me in place. It was Evelyn's voice. But there was something profoundly wrong. She wasn't calling for help or trying to return to me. Instead, she sounded disoriented, almost drugged. "I don't understand," I heard her say, faint but clear. "Where are you taking me? I need to get back to the trail." I tore through the bushes toward her voice, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing. No sign of Evelyn, no footprints, nothing. The clicking sounds had stopped too, leaving behind a deep, unnatural silence that pressed against the dense trees. I spent the next 6 hours searching, calling until my voice gave out. I moved carefully in all directions, keeping track of my path so I wouldn't get lost myself. Yet it felt as though Evelyn had vanished into thin air. As the sun began to set, I had no choice but to return to the main trail and seek help. The ensuing search and rescue operation became one of the largest in the region's history. Hundreds of volunteers scoured the forest. Search dogs tracked every inch of undergrowth, and helicopters hovered overhead for weeks. Still, no trace of Evelyn appeared during those crucial first days when she might have been alive. What they didn't know, what I tried desperately to tell them, but they refused to hear, was that we were not alone in those woods. During the search, I volunteered to guide some teams through the area where Evelyn had vanished. On 3 separate occasions, we discovered signs of someone else living deep within the forest. The first was a crude shelter built from branches and bark, so well hidden in a thicket that we almost overlooked it. Inside, there were signs of recent habitation. A fire pit with still warm ashes, animal bones cracked open for marrow, and scratches on the surrounding trees that resembled some primitive marking system. The search leader dismissed it as an old hunting camp, but I knew better. The construction was far too new and carefully concealed. 2 days later, we found another shelter roughly a mile away. This one was larger, more intricate, with sleeping areas suggesting multiple occupants. The most disturbing detail was a collection of personal items hanging from nearby trees. Pieces of clothing, hiking boots, and camping gear that clearly didn't belong to the person who built the shelter. When I suggested these might be trophies taken from missing hikers, the search coordinator told me to stop spreading panic among the volunteers. On my final day with the search team, we moved through an especially dense section of the forest when I heard those same clicking noises I had heard on the day Evelyn disappeared. The others didn't seem to notice, or perhaps dismissed it as normal forest sounds, but I recognized it immediately. I broke away from the group and followed the sounds deeper. After about 10 minutes, I stumbled upon something that still haunts me. In a small clearing was what could only be described as a primitive camp. Several shelters were arranged in a rough circle with fire pits and storage areas. But what made my skin crawl were the figures moving among them. They looked human, but something was fundamentally wrong. They shambled oddly, communicating in clicks and guttural noises. Their clothing was a mix of animal skins and stolen hiking gear. When they noticed me, they didn't flee. Instead, they stared at me with an intelligence that was simultaneously human and alien. I tried to back away silently, but stepped on a branch that cracked underfoot. Immediately, all of them turned in unison toward me. That's when I ran, harder than I have ever run, through the underbrush back to the search team. When I told the others what I'd seen, they looked at me like I had lost my mind. They claimed grief and exhaustion were playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw, and I know those people had something to do with Evelyn's disappearance. The official search was called off after 2 weeks. Derek, Evelyn's husband, never stopped looking for her. He hired private investigators, posted rewards, and kept her story in the local news for months. I helped as much as I could, but never told him about the feral people I'd encountered. How could I explain something so unbelievable without sounding insane? 2 years later, in October 2015, forestry workers found Evelyn's remains in a makeshift camp about 3 miles from where she disappeared. The official report said she had survived nearly a month before dying of exposure and starvation. They found her journal, her phone, and her camping gear neatly arranged around her body. But what the report didn't mention, what the authorities ignored, was that there was evidence of other people being at her camp. Multiple footprints surrounded her tent, primitive tools left behind, and clear signs someone had been supplying her food and water for part of the time she was missing. Her journal was incomplete, several pages torn or altered. The entries released to the public depicted a lost hiker succumbing to the wilderness. But I believe the missing pages held the truth of those 26 days. I believe Evelyn was taken by the feral people I had seen. They kept her alive for reasons I cannot bear to imagine. Her death was not the peaceful ending of a lost hiker. It was something far more sinister. The authorities will never admit it. Recognizing feral humans in national forests would spark panic and devastate the outdoor recreation industry. But I know the truth. Evelyn was not the first hiker to vanish in these woods, and she will not be the last. These feral people still roam the deepest sections of the Crestwood Trail, taking anyone who strays too far. They have learned to avoid search teams, hide their tracks, and vanish their victims without a trace. If you ever plan to hike alone in the remote sections, especially in Northern Hollow, remember Evelyn's story. Stay on the marked paths. Never wander alone. And if you hear clicking noises or see signs of primitive camps, get out immediately. Because there are things in those mountains that the authorities don't want you to know. And once they take you, you will never be found. Mara Bennett had been hiking the Cascade Ridge Mountains since she was a kid. She grew up in a quiet Virginia town tucked against the foothills of the Blue Wood Range, and her father had taken her on her first trail walk when she was barely 6 years old. By the time she turned 25, she had logged hundreds of miles across different parts of the ridge. From easy day hikes to grueling week-long backpacking trips that tested every ounce of her strength, Mara knew how to read topographic maps, purify water from streams, spot edible plants, and avoid the poisonous ones. She always carried bear spray, a whistle, and a satellite GPS that could ping her location even where cell towers didn't exist. Mara wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She simply loved the mountains with a devotion most people reserved for family or faith, and she trusted her own skill to keep her safe. In October of 2018, Mara planned a solo week-long hike through a remote section of the Cherokee Hollow Forest Reserve. She'd covered parts of that area before, but never this particular route, and she was excited to explore new ground. She told her parents her itinerary, left copies of her maps with her roommate, and packed her gear with the precision of someone who'd done it 100 times. The weather forecast was perfect. Clear skies, cool air, and Mara set off that Thursday morning with a full pack and a heart full of anticipation. The first day went exactly as planned. She hiked 12 miles through dense hardwood forest, crossed 3 creeks, and set up camp near a designated shelter where she met 2 hikers heading in the opposite direction. They swapped trail updates, warned each other about a washed-out section 6 miles north, and then went their separate ways. Mara cooked her dinner, hung her food bag high in a tree to keep it away from bears, and fell asleep to the sound of wind moving through the canopy above her tent. The next morning started normally enough. Mara woke at dawn, ate instant oatmeal with dried fruit, and broke camp. She was back on the trail by 7, her boots crunching over leaves still slick with dew. The forest was breathtaking in that uniquely autumn way, trees blazing gold and crimson, the air crisp and sharp. She hiked for hours without seeing a single soul, which was exactly what she wanted. But around midday, as she navigated a rocky stretch that climbed steeply along a ridge, she noticed little things that didn't fit. Stones that looked freshly moved, their undersides still damp, their tops dry. Branches snapped cleanly, rather than broken by wind. Boot prints in the mud beside the trail, heading in her direction, but too fresh for her not to have seen anyone ahead. She told herself she was overthinking. It was public land. People used the trails all the time. Just because she hadn't seen anyone didn't mean she was alone. But as the afternoon wore on, the feeling that she was being watched kept growing stronger. It wasn't something she could explain rationally, just a primal instinct whispering that something was wrong, that she wasn't as alone as she should be. She found herself glancing over her shoulder, scanning the trees, listening for footsteps that never quite came. Then around 3 in the afternoon, she saw him. A man, maybe 100 yards off to her left, half hidden behind a thick oak. He wasn't on the trail. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there watching. Mara froze. She lifted a hand and called out a friendly hello, trying to sound calm, hoping he was just another hiker resting off the path. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak. He just stared. A chill crept up Mara's spine despite the mild air. She considered her options. Confront him, try to outpace him, or act like nothing was wrong and hope he lost interest. She chose the third. Adjusting her pack straps, she turned back to the trail and kept walking, forcing a steady pace even though every nerve in her body screamed to run. For the next 2 hours, the man followed her. Not on the trail, but through the woods beside it, always keeping the same 100-yard distance. She caught glimpses of him between the trees, gray jacket, black pants, face hidden by shadow. He never approached or spoke, but his presence weighed on her like a physical force, a hunter's attention that made her skin crawl. She tried convincing herself it was coincidence, that he was just taking a parallel route, but deep down, she knew. This was deliberate. When the sun began to drop, she made a decision. She couldn't camp out here, not with him nearby. She needed to reach a more populated section, somewhere near a ranger post or a shelter with other hikers. According to her map, there was a junction 3 miles ahead where this trail met a more traveled route. If she pushed hard, she could reach it before dark. She picked up her pace, ignoring the burn in her legs and the ache in her shoulders. In the woods beside her, she could hear him moving too, keeping pace. Dusk fell faster than she expected, and soon the canopy had swallowed what little light remained. Within 20 minutes, she was hiking in near total darkness, her headlamp casting a narrow tunnel of light ahead. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear him. Closer now, no longer bothering to keep his distance. Maybe 30 yards away. He moved with a confidence that told her he knew these woods better than she ever could. Her breath came short and ragged. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her trekking poles. She thought about the GPS beacon in her pack, the one that could summon help, but fear kept her from stopping to reach it. Stopping meant turning around. Stopping meant giving him ground. Then came his voice, low, gravelly, and terrifyingly calm. He told her to stop running. He told her it was pointless. He told her he knew these trails better than she ever would, and that she'd never make it to the junction before he caught up. Mara didn't answer. She broke into a sprint, her headlamp beam jerking wildly through the dark. She could hear him running too, fast, heavy, gaining. The trail curved sharply right, and she nearly lost her footing, skidding on loose gravel, catching herself on a tree branch before she went down. She kept running, driven by raw adrenaline and survival instinct. That's when she saw the cabin. It was barely visible, just a black shape tucked 20 yards off the trail. She didn't think. She veered toward it, praying it was unlocked, praying she could hide. The door hung half off its hinges, swollen with age. She shoved it open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut, bracing her weight against it. The cabin was tiny, 10 feet square, dirt floor, rotting log walls, no windows, no furniture, reeking of mold and animal musk. But it had walls, a door. That was enough. Outside, the man's footsteps slowed. He began circling. His boots crunched through the leaves, deliberate and patient. Mara realized with sick certainty that he wasn't leaving. He would wait. Her shaking hands fumbled for her pack. She pulled out the GPS and triggered the emergency beacon. The light blinked. Signal sent. Someone would see it. Eventually. But she had no idea how long eventually might be. She crouched in the dark, back pressed to the door, listening as the man circled like a wolf waiting for his prey to collapse. Time blurred. She didn't know how long she'd been there when she finally heard new sounds. Voices calling her name, radio chatter, the unmistakable tone of authority. Relief hit her so hard she almost cried. She called back, her voice breaking. Within seconds, the door was pulled open and rangers flooded in, flashlights slicing through the dark. They checked her over, told her they'd received her distress signal, told her she was safe now. When she explained what had happened, about the man, his voice, his pursuit, they searched the woods, but they found no one. What they did find froze her blood. About 50 yards from the cabin, buried under leaves and branches, was a hidden cache: rope, duct tape, a hunting knife, and a small pile of personal belongings that clearly came from different people. A woman's hair tie, a man's watch, a pair of child-sized hiking boots, and several Polaroid photos of hikers, all taken from a distance, all unaware they were being watched. Some of the faces matched missing persons reports from the past 3 years. 7 hikers had vanished in this part of Cherokee Hollow. 7 people who had simply never returned. Investigators had assumed they'd gotten lost, fallen, or succumbed to wildlife. Now they knew better. Someone had been hunting in these woods, watching, waiting, choosing, and Mara had almost been number 8. The man was never found. Despite an intensive investigation involving state and federal authorities, no arrests were made. The cache was taken as evidence, but whoever had left it disappeared into the wilderness like smoke. Mara left the mountains that night in the back of a ranger's vehicle and never went back. She sold all her gear, deleted her trail apps, and found new hobbies, ones that didn't involve being alone in the wild. She still thinks about him sometimes. His voice, his patience, the way his footsteps circled that cabin. She wonders if he's still out there, still watching, still waiting for the next solo hiker to cross his path. And she wonders how many more like him are out there. How many predators have learned that the quiet, forgotten corners of the Cascade Ridge make the perfect hunting ground for those who prey on the vulnerable and alone. If you love true horror tales, don't forget to subscribe. A new story awaits you every night. Thanks for watching, and good night.